Hey, this is Jake with the Tractor Yard, and today I'm going to walk you through a 50-hour service on TYM and Branson 15 series tractors and Bad Boy 40 series tractors. So if you weren't aware, TYM purchased Branson, the brand, several years ago, and so TYM and Branson 15 series tractors are all the same. Also, Bad Boy tractors are made by TYM, and they use a few of the Branson models as well. So the 4035 and the 4025 are also covered in this video. If you're curious if your tractor's model applies to this video, check the description and I'll list out every applicable model that this video will cover. This service is not difficult and you can definitely do it at home. So follow along as we walk through the process on how we do it here at the shop. So the majority of this video is going to be shown doing a service on a 2515 hydrostat model. So there are hydrostats and there are shuttle shift tractors in the 15 and 40 series. So this is a hydrostatic model, so it's going to have two hydraulic filters. This is for the actual hydraulic system, and this is for your hydrostat. Another difference that you're going to notice on some of these models, 15 and 40 series, is the drain plugs. So this model has a singular drain plug, and some of the other machines will have a smaller drain plug here and another smaller drain plug here. So every model that's above 25 horsepower will have a DPF filter. And the reason I mention this on a 50-hour service video is because I normally force a regen at the 50-hour service as a service to the customer. Now, this isn't required and it's not in any of the service manuals, so you don't have to do this step, but I highly recommend that you do since you're setting aside time to service the tractor. So another difference to pay attention to is the engine oil capacity. So I would go ahead and buy 2 gallons of 1540 Rotella T4 for your oil change, no matter which model you have, because normally it takes about a gallon. I normally put just under a gallon in, check the dipstick, and then add from there. But some of these models are going to take more than a gallon. They should all take less than 2 gallons, but it's never a bad idea to have some engine oil on hand. So the only other difference is going to be the style of fuel filter. Now, for the 50-hour service, the fuel filter isn't necessarily something that you have to change per the manual, but we normally do it here in the shop just to be safe. Now, there's 2 styles of fuel filters on the 15 and 40 series tractors. This is the newer style, so it's an integrated fuel water separator, and that is the only fuel filter on this tractor. Now, on some of the older style 15 series tractors, I don't think any of the Bad Boys are going to be this way, but some of the older Branson 15 series are going to have a cartridge style filter, so just one of those paper cartridge style filters. So just pay attention to what type of fuel filter you have before you order your parts. Now, the first thing that we like to do when we do a 50-hour service is just walk around and do a visual inspection of the tractor, see if there's anything broken, missing, loose, or just generally out of place, leaking, and we'll take a mental note or a physical list of everything that needs to be addressed separately from the service. So one of the things that we make sure to check on all these 50-hour services are the bolts, especially the ones holding the loader brackets to the frame. And it's nice when the PDI happens or from the factory, if they put a hash mark on those bolts. That way you know when they back off and you can visually see that. A lot of times I'm just looking at these lock washers to see if they're collapsed. The other place we see bolts back out a lot are the bolts holding a subframe to the engine block and the transmission case. And then of course the lug nuts. Again, you can visually inspect, or you can put a wrench on these to just make sure that they're staying tight. I like to check and make sure that the battery terminals are staying tight. Also like to check these ground locations when I come across, make sure that they look relatively clean and tight. Front seals appear to be dry. Looks like he's been greasing his tractor pretty regularly, so good to see that. So next thing I'm going to do is check all the fluid levels. And I did run this machine for several minutes to get it up to operating temp, and then let it sit. Have the loader down, and we're on a level surface. So looks pretty good there, as long as I've got oil on that hash mark and it's not coming way up this dipstick. Then I'm gonna say the level's good. Fluid looks clean. Fuel filter, looks like that float is sitting at the bottom, so no water in it. So that's good. Engine oil, dipstick is hiding, it's back here. Wipe that off, put it back in so I know I get an accurate reading. Okay, so that's definitely on the high side, but not over full. So I like my oil level to be in between these two notches, kind of erring on the side of full. You definitely don't want to be over that hash mark. So this is good. Oil smells good, doesn't smell burnt. And then I like to kind of just make sure it still has good viscosity and a little bit of tack to it, which it does. As far as coolant, we're a little bit low in the overflow tank, so we'll top that up. This has cooled down, but I'm gonna ease this open. And we do have coolant right there at the top, so that's good. Let's go ahead and check the condition of the air filter since we're here. And that's looking pretty rough. Not too bad, but I think I am going to go ahead and recommend that he replace that. So to check the front axle level on these tractors, there's a yellow cap on this side and a vent plug on this side. This is going to be a 27 millimeter. And looks like that front axle fluid is a bit low. So since that fluid's low, I'll pay extra attention when I drain this and make sure that I don't see any metal flake or any damage. But generally, if these things have a decent amount of fluid in them, even if they're not on the dipstick, you don't see much damage. But we'll find out once we drop that fluid. So the last thing I'm gonna do before I pull this in is I'm just gonna function test everything, make sure all the features on this work as expected. That way I'm doing a full test of this tractor, which is part of what we do on a 50-hour service, and something I definitely recommend if you're doing this yourself. You take the time to test every function on the tractor and just make sure that you're not missing anything. Now, typically on a 50-hour service, we're not doing a radiator flush or anything like that. It's a separate service. We do just make sure everything's topped off. One thing to note is make sure that you get the correct coolant based on what is in your tractor from the factory. Some of it's red, some of it's green. You just want to make sure that you match the color. If you have any questions, just contact your dealer before you buy coolant. In these reservoir tanks, you just want to be in between the low and the high mark or the full mark. I usually try to err on the low side just to make sure you don't overfill that tank. You'll have more problems than if you underfill it. I like to have the loader up and out of my way when I do a 50-hour service, so I'll raise it up and take a piece of angle iron and jam between the cylinder. That way it doesn't drift down on me while I'm using it. For the 50-hour service, what we're going to do is replace both of the hydrostat filters. We're going to replace the engine oil filter and the engine oil, the hydrostatic transmission fluid. Normally we clean the air filter. This one we're going to go ahead and replace. We're going to change the fluid in the front end, and then just our general inspection. Also, one thing we include that isn't necessarily called for in the manual for a 50-hour service is we try to go ahead and replace that fuel filter just to be safe. So it takes the longest really to drain all of this fluid, so I like to start draining all of it kind of at the same time. I've got this drain pan that I bought from Vevor. This thing has really come in handy. If you're in the market for a really nice drain pan, I think this is a 20 gallon and it comes with this electric pump to pump your fluid out so you're not lifting and dumping fluid all the time. And this is nice because you can hold all of your 50-hour service fluids in this one pan for most of these compact tractors. Now, I usually try to run that underneath it and then 2 pans on the fronts for the front axle fluid, and then we'll have another small pan underneath the engine block to drain the engine oil. So on the 15 series, you're gonna have 2 drain plugs for the front axle, and these are 17 millimeter. One thing you can do to help these drain a little faster is pull that dipstick, set it aside. So underneath the tractor, we're going to need to pull both drain plugs for the transmission to drain the hydrostatic fluid, and then the drain plug for the engine oil. And these are all 3 17 millimeter. So while everything's draining, I'm just going to go around and grease everything. So next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and replace this fuel filter. And to get it off, we've got 2 nuts, 1 on each side for these studs here, and 2 fuel lines. It's nice to have some fuel clamps for this, just to keep from making a huge mess. Get this element off. It's a 14 millimeter. And there's your fuel filter assembly. Definitely want to make sure not to over tighten these because it is pushing, we're clamping against the plastic housing of the filter. So just snug is good. So the best way to prime these filters, since you do have an electric fuel pump, you can just unscrew this port on the top. It's just a little thumb screw, get it loose, turn your key on, and you can watch that bowl fill up. And then I'll let it squirt all the air bubbles out the top. and start running a little bit of fuel. So we're getting a steady stream of fuel now. You can see it dripping out of the bottom. So I'm going to tighten that screw back down. And then I like to let it continue to run for 30 seconds or so, just to make sure that anything lost out of this line gets primed up. And there'll be a tiny bit of air probably in the system, but if you prime it this way, usually you won't have enough air in the system for the tractor to fall on its face, and it'll work any air through it. So we've greased everything, we did the fuel filter, everything's pretty much drained, so I'm gonna start pulling off all these filters. I'll spin the oil filter back on, both hydrostatic transmission filters, and then I'll start refilling all the fluids. So let's start with pulling off this engine oil filter. Get both of these hydro filters off. Now, this has obviously been done before because a lot of times those are super tight. But this outer one is usually the easier one. It's this inner one that's a pain in the butt to get to. So this last filter, like I said, it's a pain in the butt to get to and get around. So this style of wrench will fit around it here. Try to get the best bite that I can. All right, spinning these hydraulic filters back on. I usually just take a little bit of oil on my finger and wet down the seal. And I don't generally pre-fill hydraulic filters. I just don't personally believe it's necessary since these are pumped. You know, worst thing that's gonna happen really with these is you kick it on, idle it, and let the pump pre-fill everything. So not really gonna do any damage by not pre-filling these. Now, personally on these, I try not to get them over tight just to make it easier for the next time, but you do want to get them snug. So I'll get them hand tight and then just maybe a quarter turn or so with a wrench. Same thing with this secondary filter, your hydrostat filter. Now with the engine oil filter, I do like to pre-fill a little bit. I just don't like the idea of starting an engine up and letting it run with low oil pressure for too long. So I do pre-fill it. I don't get crazy about it. I try to fill it once here. Because the other thing, like the argument against pre-filling, is pouring contaminated fluid into your filter. Because this is the post-filtrated side. So I try to make sure that I pour good clean oil in it, and then, like I said, only just filled up once, let it soak in, and then I'll spin this filter on. And honestly, with the engine oil filter, I generally just try to get it as tight as I can by hand. I don't usually put a filter wrench on it personally. As far as engine oil goes, we typically use this just basic Shell Rotella 1540 T4. That's what we've used for years and years, and that stuff is plenty good for these engines, and we've had absolutely zero problems out of that Rotella T4. Now what I like to do is fill about a gallon, and then I'll check the dipstick and see where we're at. So I filled about a gallon, or actually a little under a gallon, and I'm about 2/3 up this stick, which to me is perfect because we'll have some draw up into that oil filter, and I like to be right in between those hash marks. So before I go filling, I'm just going to hand tighten all these drain plugs. That way if I need to drain some out, I can just pull one of these plugs, and at the very end I'll go back and torque all these on. Same with these front axle plugs. And then really with these front axles, it's best to fill on each side, so I will go ahead and pull that vent plug out, and I'll get some 80-90 gear oil and start filling this front axle. This little rig here is what we typically use for these front axles. Of course, you can use a funnel, but when you have this, why not use it? So normally, I think these call actually for a gallon per side, but usually it doesn't take quite that much. So I'm just going to pump a little bit in here, and then I'll check it with this dipstick and see where we're at. And again, so this axle does share fluid, but to really make sure you get this thing full, you need to fill and check both sides. So the way that works is you can pull that vent plug out of that side and this dipstick will thread in to both sides. So it looks like I'm on. I'm gonna double check that. Try to make sure I don't pick up any fluid from the wall. And these are kind of a slow process. It just takes a while for this oil to settle. So if you start pumping in too fast, you'll do what I just did and overflow it, which it's not actually over full. That fluid has just got to dissipate through this axle, and it takes a second for that to happen. I just go through this repetitive process of pump a little in, check with the stick, and then repeat that until I start getting the level I'm after. So one thing you can do to kind of be more efficient, because this does take a while, is you can pull this other cap, and while that fluid is settling, after you've pumped it a few times, you can come over to the other side and pump it. And you can kind of just go back and forth from each side just to make this process go a little bit quicker. And right there in the middle, so I'm happy with that level. As long as you're in that hash zone on these, you're safe. But it is important to check both sides, because you can definitely underfill it if you only fill one side, because it just takes time for the fluid to pass between, both hub assemblies. So the last thing I need to fill up is the transmission fluid, or the hydraulic fluid, and we use Quality Petroleum Premium Hydraulic Fluid. This is a J20C equivalent. I believe the spec on all these is actually like a GL4, but we've always used this J20C equivalent in all of our compact tractors, and we've been using it for 15 years or so now, and haven't had any issues at all whatsoever. We've never ever had a hydrostat unit go bad since we've sold compact tractors. Aside from one replacement we did where the factory had just accidentally left a bolt loose essentially on the hydrostat assembly inside the tractor. So definitely recommend a J20C equivalent, a premium quality fluid. You won't have any issues at all. So obviously, if you're doing this at home, you're probably just going to have 5-gallon buckets, and sometimes this can be really hard to get to. What we've done in the past is take a funnel and a stretch of garden hose and hang that funnel up here, and sometimes that makes it easier. But since we do so many, we went ahead and went to Harbor Freight and bought this transfer pump, and we buy it in 55-gallon drums, and we bought this drum cart off Amazon. So this is just a really efficient way for us to fill hydraulic fluid. So I'm not sure exactly off the top of my head what the spec is on these, but I'm going to try to put what I believe is about 5 gallons in, and then I'll check the level and go from there. So maybe hard to see on the camera, but we've got it perfect right there in the middle of the hash. So I may squirt just a little in there for good measure, but otherwise that's going to be perfect. The reason I say I'll squirt a little bit more in there is just because I know that those hydraulic filters are empty, and you'd be surprised how much capacity those take up as they fill up. So this service is completely done. The very last thing I'm going to do is take this Radiator Genie, which is an awesome product. I think it's about 50 bucks. You get this air wand and the water wand. It's just a really high pressure nozzle that's going to help you keep everything clean on this tractor. So I like using air a lot more than using water, because water gets in seals, water gets in electrical connectors. So I try to minimize how much water I use when I wash my equipment. So compressed air is definitely the way to go, and this product by Radiator Genie is one that we've used for years and we love it. So very last thing before I pull it out is I'm going to start it up, let it idle for a minute, get that hydraulic pump cycled. I'm going to pull that angle iron out, and then I'm going to cycle the the loader up a few times, and then just double check all my fluids, top anything off if anything's low, and that'll wrap it up. So that's going to wrap it up for the 50-hour service on this 2515H. If you need any of the filters to do this 50-hour service, give our parts department a call at 918-486-4464. We ship filters and parts all over the country. We appreciate you taking the time to watch our video. Be sure to check out our channel to watch even more of our videos. Appreciate you watching, and see you next time. So the very last thing that I like to do on a 50-hour service is force a regeneration. Now, if you're not familiar with what a regeneration is, the DPF filter periodically will tell you when it gets clogged up. And typically under normal operation, if you're running their machine with plenty of exhaust temperature, so if you're running at above 1500 RPMs, you may not have to regen for a long time. But eventually a couple of lights will flash on your screen that look like this, telling you that the DPF filter is getting clogged and it needs to burn the soot off within that filter. So what you have to do is basically engage the regeneration process manually. Now, that's what happens if the filter does soot up while you're working it. Now, there's nothing saying that you can't force a regeneration as a preventative measure. So that's what I like to do anytime someone brings in a tractor for a 50-hour service or an intervaled service. So in order to force a regen on one of these tractors, all you have to do is make sure that your parking brake is engaged, and you'll verify that your system knows it's engaged by seeing your parking brake light on the dash. you have to be in neutral. So make sure that if you have a hydrostat, that you tap your pedals until you see the neutral light holding on your dash. Then you need to have at least 2400 RPMs. And once you have all those prerequisites met, you hold this button down for about 3 seconds and you'll hear the exhaust or the engine noise, the engine tone change. And that's because this valve right here closes off your exhaust stream and helps build pressure and temperature within that filter. Now the regeneration will take, I would say on average, 25 to 45 minutes. If you're well outside of that range for any reason, give us a call and we can chat about it, but something probably went wrong. But it's a pretty basic process. Just follow those steps to start the regen and let that thing run until it quits. And you'll know when it quits because the lights will go off on the dash and the engine tone will return to normal. Now you want to make sure that before you start your regen that you're parked in a position where you can stay for the next 45 minutes to an hour, just to make sure you're not in the way, because this tractor will need to be stationary throughout the regeneration process.
A new generation, honesty is their reputation, so accept no imitation. Get up